Hi, everybody. As promised, I said I would discuss some of the issues surrounding suicide. Before I get to our discussion, though, I want to go over some of the introduction, some of the things I talked about when we were together. Although some of y'all were there for the class, most of our soldiers weren't there. So I want to kind of set the table and explain my purpose and my narrative before we get started. September 8th, just a few days ago, the Army's new suicide prevention program went into effect. AR 600-92. This is now policy. It's a regulation. We've got, 76 pages? Something like that. 70 pages, give or take, on suicide, the suicide prevention program. Now, the suicide prevention program is focused on three elements. There's prevention, intervention, and postvention. Things are pretty detailed, and they're pretty good. These procedures, if followed correctly, if done right, they save lives. And I know that from personal experience. I've been involved in situations where we went through procedures, we were able to save lives. Caveat, it doesn't always work, unfortunately. However, it is important to know these procedures, especially for leaders, but in suicide prevention, right, every soldier's a safety, and every one of us is a leader when it comes to trying to make a difference in suicide. This AR refers to suicide as a public health concern. This is a public health situation. Now, although I do agree it's a public health concern, or may I even say it's a public health crisis, on a macro level, on an institutional level, on an organizational level, yes, it's a public health crisis. The question is, though, for the soldier, airman, Marine, veteran, you name it, for them, is it a public health crisis when somebody wants to blow their brains out? Is it a public health crisis when somebody's living in misery? When somebody is so hurt, so broken, they live in such horrible darkness? To them, do you think it's a public health concern? A public safety concern? We have to treat it that way because we all need to work together to decrease this problem, decrease the numbers, and hopefully put an end to it. My problem with AR 600-92 is two things. One, I didn't see anywhere where it explains why I shouldn't kill myself. It explains different causes, different environments, different situations, different scenarios, company commanders, detachments, procedures. There's all kinds of things. Family member suicide prevention, the Army suicide prevention workforce, it's got all kinds of great things in here. And again, I will say that when it works, we can save lives. But what about when it doesn't work? What about when a soldier asks for help and we check all the boxes, following procedure, we check all of the boxes, and then they kill themselves? Something I was involved with just a couple of years ago, where a soldier, well, he's a veteran, I think he was out already, still had family in the military. He was in crisis, went to the VA. They couldn't admit him because they didn't have any space in their psych ward. I guess for whatever reason, he couldn't be in an emergency situation. They couldn't put him up someplace else. Point is that they gave him a bag of meds, sent him home, told him to call the next day to make an appointment to see a professional. By the next morning, he was dead. So what happens when this doesn't work? And the big question, which I haven't seen answered yet, is why should soldiers not kill themselves? If I'm miserable and I'm living in darkness and I'm so broken and hurt and I don't see a way out of it, why should I not kill myself? Is it because it's bad for recruitment? Is it because it's bad for the image? Is it because it's bad press? Is it because it's bad for unit cohesion? Well, guess what? None of these things matter in my misery. In addition to that, what about if the army is the reason that I want to kill myself? Now, don't get me wrong. I absolutely love the Army, and I plan to stay in the Army as long as I can until the Army kicks me out. They may kick me out for old age, or they may kick me out for this video. I have no idea. But I plan on staying in the Army for the long haul. I absolutely love the Army. I love the Army values. I love the culture. I love the mission. I certainly love the work that I do. But what when the Army puts a soldier through a situation where it's life, it affects their lives in a way that they do not want to go on living? Say their pay gets jacked up. For whatever reason, somebody made a mistake, whether it was in the unit or somewhere else, or one of our very high-speed DA civilians out at HRC or someplace. I'm not talking at the unit level. Thank God we have been very, very blessed with the best of the best when it came to DA civilians in our unit. But what about when pay gets jacked up, soldier falls behind on their bills, their needs, so now they can't stay in their housing, their family, spouse and children are couch surfing. The spouse is going to leave them. They're not getting to see their child. Maybe they're behind on child support, and now they're facing possible arrest. It's affecting their overall demeanor. It sends them into a spiral for whatever reason. These things happen. I'm not just trying to be creative. These are situations I actually dealt with. Okay? Extremely tragic situations where people found themselves in behavioral health crises and suicidal because of things that the Army caused. Now, the Army doesn't try to cause these things, and the Army does whatever they can to take care of our soldiers. And that's a fact. I'm not just blowing smoke. That's a fact. But the fact is that sometimes these things happen. So what if the Army's the reason that the soldier is suicidal? The Army has not given me a reason not to kill myself. The Army hasn't given any one of us a reason. So that's one issue I have. The biggest issue, which kind of deals a little bit about this first issue, is that the Army is using this premise as they're under the impression or wants us to think that suicide is the problem. And I have an issue with that. You don't have people waking up in the morning saying, you know what? I'm in a really good place. I have a beautiful, loving family. Everyone's healthy. I love my job. I'm financially stable. I have what I need. Things are going well. I feel like I'm growing. I feel like I'm developing. Things are going really well. I think today's a really good day to die, and I'm going to kill myself. And then they put a bullet through their head or hang themselves or swallow a bottle of pills. That doesn't happen. Suicide is not the problem. The problem is a life that leads to suicide. Suicide is a tragedy, and I've been involved with so many of them. I've been involved directly, indirectly. I haven't been counting, and I don't want to count, but I've done many. I would say the majority of the casualty notifications that I've done were suicides. And I've done many notifications. I've been involved in interventions and postventions. And suicide is a tragedy. There's no question about it. But what is a bigger tragedy is a life that leads to suicide. That's the true tragedy. The problem is not the suicide. The problem is a life that leads to suicide. And if we keep focusing on suicide being the problem, and all of these 70 pages dealing with prevention, intervention, postvention, all of these things which are important and they're great and they do save lives. But if we stay stuck in this narrative, in this premise that suicide is the problem, we're not going to get this under control. We're not giving ourselves a chance to deal with the real issue, which is living such a miserable existence that suicide is the best option. Death is the best option. It's the only way to stop the pain. It's the only way to stop suffering. It's the only way to get out of this misery. Chaplain Teitelbaum just recently retired. He was the chief of chaplains. Chaplain, Major General Teitelbaum, a good man, a very, very good man, a good leader. I learned a lot from him. And he was very, I would say, revolutionary in his approach. That the only way to get suicide under control is to teach soldiers about a life worth living. If you do not live a life worth living, then suicide is a good option. If you do not live a life worth living, then when things become difficult and things are hard, you're not dealing with a problem. You're dealing with an existential question. Why do I exist? So that's an answer we have to ask ourselves. And I'm not going to get philosophical. This is not meant to be a religious or philosophical platform or discussion. My intention is to be extremely practical, extremely straightforward, and I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going to be transparent. I'm going to be extremely raw. I'm going to say things the way it is. I'm not going to try to sound prophetic. I'm not going to try to sound holy and better than anybody. We need to have real discussions. We need to address this in a real way, because otherwise we're losing the battle. We're losing a battle of 22 a day. That's the number that has stuck for years and years and years, 22 a day. So the question is, how do we live a life worth living? Obviously, you can't answer this question in one conversation. It has to be part of a bigger, broader, longer conversation where we discuss many different topics, many different issues that affect our lives on a day-to-day basis and in a very practical, honest, raw way. So before I end up, I'm going to give you kind of a snapshot of what's to come. And I'm going to get into more detail on our next conversation. But in order to live a life worth living, your life has to be focused on pleasure. If you do not have pleasure in your life, then you do not have a reason to live. Okay? Because pain is pain. It's a situation. If I have pain in my life and I have pleasure in my life, then I still have a reason to live. But the opposite of pain is not pleasure. The opposite of pain is lack of pain. And lack of pain is just not enough to live for. Because if I'm in pain, I don't have comfort. If I don't have pleasure, then I have nothing. All I have is pain. I need to have pleasure in my life so that when I have pain and I have darkness and I have struggles and I have heartache, I have the pleasure to keep me going and keep me alive. So stay tuned for our next conversation, and I hope you tune in.